Welcome to this podcast from Rolling Roads Baptist Church of Greensboro, North Carolina. You're invited to join with us as we are growing towards Christ. The following is a message from a recent Sunday morning worship service.
Well, hello everybody. I'm going to try to do a very short podcast this week to see if we get more people who participate. This again is from the Bible Studies for Life Personal Study Guide, and our session is Live Courageously, again from the book of Daniel. And the main point is to do the right thing in God's strength. And so they ask us, what change or innovation in your lifetime have you gladly embraced? Embracing change. You know, they used to say that the only thing that is certain is that things are going to change. And so the person tells a story about being on the phone, car phone with his sister, spoke out loud and told my car to call my sister. She answered and said, "Hold on, let me get my phone. I'm talking to my watch." Very funny. And then, so they talk about changing, He says at the end, that writer says, "I remember thinking I will always use a phone attached to the wall. Boy, was I ever wrong." So Daniel chapter 6, once again, the main point, do the right thing in God's strength. So the administrators and the satraps went together to the king and said to him, "May King Darius live forever. All the administrators of the kingdom, the prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors, have agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an edict that for 30 days anyone who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den." So I guess now you know which story we're covering today briefly. "Therefore, your majesty, establish the edict and sign the document so that as a law of the Medes and Persians it is irrevocable and cannot be changed." So King Darius signed the written edict. When Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he went into his house. The windows in its upstairs room opened toward Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees, prayed, and gave thanks to his God, just as he had done before. And so here's Daniel about to be thrown into the lion's den because he was praying. So what happened? The new law did not change Daniel's behavior. The new law, the immoral law, did not change Daniel's behavior. He continued praying, quote, just as he had done before, verse 10. The Bible does not require a person to kneel and pray 3 times a day. The priests presented offerings and prayers in the temple at the time of sacrifice in the morning and the evening. Further, many Jews prayed while standing, 1 Chronicles 23:30 and Matthew 6:5. Daniel's visible practice and posture reflected what could not be seen: the commitment of his heart and his love for the Father. Daniel knew prayer is essential for a person of faith and that it changes things. Prayer was a priority for Daniel. So having a room upstairs indicated that Daniel had an elevated status in Persian culture. A flat roof with a protective parapet was common. A room upstairs with windows was not. Windows on a lower level were usually located high on the wall and covered with lattice. So Daniel's upstairs windows gave a clear view. So at the temple dedication, Solomon had introduced the practice of facing Jerusalem when praying, 2 Chronicles 6:34 through 39. God had revealed his presence and glory in the temple, 1 Kings 8:10 through 11. And although the Babylonians had destroyed Jerusalem and its temple, God promised to return and reveal his glory there again. Ezekiel 42:1 through 5, Jeremiah 29:10 through 14. So, facing Jerusalem while praying symbolized faith and hope. You know, Daniel knew what Darius had signed. He knew about the document, verse 10, but it did not change his behavior. And what we can learn is that we need to be like Daniel and do the right thing in God's strength. We can learn from Daniel's example that Daniel prayed consistently. He set aside time each day to pray, which meant prayer was a priority. He prayed unashamedly and expectantly, trusting God would keep his promises. Daniel set a pattern for us to follow still today. So, verses 11 through 13 of Daniel 6. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel petitioning and imploring his God. So they approached the king and asked about his edict. Didn't you sign an edict that for 30 days any person who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, as the law of the Medes and Persians, the order stands and is irrevocable. Then they replied to the king, Daniel, one of the Judean exiles, has ignored you, the king, and the edict you signed, for he prays 3 times a day. You know these jerks knew that Daniel prayed 3 times a day, if you've read the book of Daniel. His accusers setting a trap for him. They were conspirators, and yet Daniel prayed regularly because he knew the battle was not physical or political, it was spiritual. And so this scene compels us to ask ourselves what we should do. Page 53. When faced with obeying what God says or what the law says, when the two conflict with each other, the Bible teaches us that we are to obey the law, Romans 13, 1 through 2. It also shows, though, that God's law takes priority over man's law, Acts 5:29. As our world becomes increasingly secular, there will be occasions when obeying God's word or man's law will be a choice. Believers are forced to weigh the consequences and decide who to obey. It's easy to boldly proclaim, as for me and my family, we will worship the Lord, Joshua 24:15, when there is no penalty. But we are called to a different level of commitment when, listen to this, following God's will means losing a job, a business, or even going to jail. The time to make the decision is beforehand, not in the heat of the moment. So Daniel, do you think he had to think about what to do? Nope. He knew he was giving his life for prayer. And so verses 16 through 17, and then it skips around in Daniel 6. So the king gave the order. They brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. And the king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you continually serve, rescue you. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing in regard to Daniel could be changed. In verse 21 at the end, Daniel spoke with the king. May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they haven't harmed me, for I was found innocent before him, and also before you, your majesty. I have not done harm. Then the king was overjoyed and gave orders to take Daniel out of the den. When Daniel was brought up from the den, he was found to be unharmed, for he trusted in his God. So they had sentenced him to death, and yet Daniel knew that he would either die in faith or live in faith. And the Lord chose to keep him alive. And you know what happened? I think the king, realizing that he was throwing his friend into a certain death, was also probably praying for him. But he fulfilled the law that he made, didn't he? He threw him in the lion's den, but the law didn't say he had to die there. And so God saved him. Daniel's faith, page 55. Daniel was now probably over 80 years old. Just seems like a few weeks ago we were talking about the young men in the mentors program there. His unfailing love and devotion for God had always been evident. Daniel had not hidden his faith. So Darius's actions that morning are a reminder that people are watching us, especially in times of difficulty. The king was worried, and yet Daniel was true to God and these people had lied to the king. So Darius realized the intent of the accusers was to destroy Daniel, not to honor the king. So people are watching. How do we behave under pressure? Do we do the right thing in God's strength? How can spiritual practices or habits prepare us to stand firm in the face of opposition? Well, I pray we don't have opposition, but I think we should plan to have it. So our challenge is to remain faithful to Him. Well, I hope this short podcast has been a blessing to you. And that is the end of that lesson, more or less. And Lord willing, I'll see you in church real soon at Rolling Roads Baptist. God bless.
Thank you for listening. Rolling Roads Baptist Church is located at 2800 Van Story Street in Greensboro, North Carolina, near Four Seasons Town Center and Smith High School. You're invited to join with us this Sunday morning at 11 a.m. as we are growing towards Christ. Find us on Facebook and at rollingroads.org.